Croeso nôl, welcome back, thanks for joining me. This is episode 8 or 9 now, possibly, and we haven't looked at the word Llan yet. And bear in mind, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of places in Wales called Llan. I think it's time we looked at it. And where better to start than here in this gorgeous little village of Llanfair Talhaiarn.
Mi glywaf dyner lais yn galw arna fi I ddod a golchi me a gyd yn afon Calfari. Arglwydd dyma fi ar dy alwad di. Can a fynaid yn y gwaed a gaed ar galfari. Yr Iesu sy'n fy ngwad.
Okay, so what is a Llan? Well, a Llan, quite simply, started off as what you see behind me here, a church. That's the original meaning. However, soon, very early days, an enclosure was built around churches. So Llan incorporated the church and its enclosure. Soon, people built houses in the vicinity of the church. And so, those houses became part of the Llan. And to this day, we basically consider Llan to be a parish. So church and its enclosure, and then eventually ending up as a parish. And that's basically what Llan means. Now then, top tip for you. Llan can be difficult to say if you're not a Welsh speaker, but if you can make that sh noise, and then simply move your tongue to the roof of your mouth, just behind your top teeth, and then that will change from sh to lla. So there we are. Llan simply means church and its enclosure, and in this day and age, probably a parish. Now then, because there's so many of them, we obviously need to distinguish between them. Now this one is St Mary's Church, Llanfair. And there are loads of Llanfair, they're literally everywhere. So we need to be able to distinguish between them. So with churches, generally, not every time, but generally, they're given two names, or the names derived from two things. One is who the church is dedicated to, or who built it, or alternatively, its location. There are some exceptions, and we'll have a look at one of those later on. So this is Llanfair, the Church of St Mary, and this one was built by the monk Talhaiarn, so it becomes Llanfair Talhaiarn. Other Llans, Llandudno, Saint Idno, Llanrwst, Saint Crwst, and so on and so forth. You will never see just the name Llanfair. Llanfair will always have something after it. So an idiosyncrasy is Llanfair Fechan. Fechan means small, so the small church of St Mary. You've got Llanfair Llangernyw, which is the Church of St Mary in Llangernyw, and so on and so forth. The outskirts of the village of Llanfair Talhaiarn, currently standing in the field walking alongside the River Elwy, which is just over my right shoulder there, but more about that soon. But as you'll see around me here, large fields, huge fields, and they're just on the periphery of the village. You can see them on the left hand side as you come in from the direction of Abergele. Now I'm led to believe, and I think it's right, that in the late 19th century, the 1880s, 200 soldiers and 100 police officers were camped in these fields. It's an extraordinary amount of personnel. And the reason for it was because of the Rhyfel Degwm, the tithe wars. Tithe meaning a tenth, Degwm, a tenth. And in the late 18th century, the church built churches everywhere around Wales and Ireland and the rest of the UK. And they to pay for the vicar and the church and so on, they took a tenth of the earnings of the local people, and in this case, vastly rural area. Now, at that time, agriculture was suffering, so they were already poor. And what made things worse here was, of course, all the vicars and the preachers and so forth that came into the churches spoke in English, and the local community spoke only Welsh. So they were paying for a preacher that they couldn't understand. Now, when the preachers and the vicars of the church came for their payment, the farmers literally couldn't pay it. They didn't have enough. So bailiffs came and took property by force, and it all kicked off. And here in this area was the hotbed of all that. There were riots in Llanefydd, Llansanan, Mochtra. In Mochtra, 80 people were injured and 38 people arrested. In Llansanan, there was an actual death. So it was a pretty volatile time, to say the least. Yeah. So here we are, down by the River Elwy, behind me there, just a short distance from the village. Now, the reason I've come here and talk about Elwy is, as we've heard before, churches will either be named after a person that's dedicated to or built by, otherwise it's a location. And this is the River Elwy, which flows down to what we now call St Asaph. His real name, his Welsh name, is Llan Elwy. So it's the church on the River Elwy, and this is the river. Now, Elwy means thrusting, fast flowing, and the roots of it is probably elu, which means to profit, to make a gain. The wy, possibly, from what we've heard before, where the old ancient Welsh word for river was dwy, so thrusting river. So here we go. The River Elwy, given its name to Llan Elwy, now known as the cathedral city of St Asaph.
Gogonian byth am dref, y cymod ar glanhad, der y byniar Iesu fel y rwyf, a chanaf am y gwaith.
So we've moved down the road, only about 3 or 4 miles, to this village called Llangernyw. More about that in a second. But behind me here you see a pub, great pub. Recommend if you're ever in the area, pop in here. Food's great, beer's great, lovely atmosphere. It's called the Old Stag, or in Welsh, yr Hen Hydd. Now, hen means old, hydd means stag, the Old Stag. Now, I'm filming this in October, in the autumn, and the Welsh word for autumn is hydref, which comes from Hydd bref, the stag's braying, and it notifies the rutting season of the stag. So Hydd bref, hydref. So there you go. Yeah, come here for food, wonderful. Anyway, let's go and find out why Llangernyw is called Llangernyw. We will need to go a short distance. Here we are in the Llan in Llangernyw. It's actually called St Tigain's Church. St Tigain, built by St Tigain. Now, St Tigain is declared to be a Welsh saint, but he was the son of Constance of Cornwall. And that's where Cernyw comes from, Cernyw being Welsh for Cornwall. So although he's declared as being Welsh, he's actually from Cornwall, but of course in those days, Cornwall, Wales was all part of Britain. And there we have it. So that's why Llangernyw is called Llangernyw, the Church of the Cornish. And behind me here, you see huge yew tree. Of course, we see a lot of those in churches. But this one here is recorded as being one of the oldest living things in the whole of Europe. And it's measured to be 4,000 years old. Absolutely ancient. That's seen a few things. Now then, behind me here is the east window of St. Tigainn's Church. We'll hopefully go in and have a look at that. Now there's a legend behind here, and the legend is that if you stand in front of that window at midnight on Halloween's Eve, Noson Calan Gaeaf in Welsh, Calan means calendar, Gaeaf means winter, so the first night of winter, Halloween. If you stand there at midnight, you will hear the Angelus Stor, the recording angel. And the recording angel is reputed to shout out the names of all who will die in the vicinity in the next 12 months. Now, there's a famous tale of a young lad, young carpenter from the village called Sean ap Robert, who was in the pub when this legend was told to him. Now, young Sean was a bit cocksure of himself and decried that it was all a load of nonsense. So clearly, as people in pubs do, he was challenged to go and stand in front of the window at midnight on Halloween, which he duly did. And as he stood out in front of the window, it wasn't too long before the Angelus Stor read out his name. Sean, again, didn't believe it, thought it was all nonsense, but was a little bit afeared because he had heard his name. And sure enough, 3 months later, Sean was no more. So it's going to be Halloween in a couple of weeks' time, but you won't see me anywhere near here, I can tell you. So here we are inside the church, and there's the east window from the other side. Beautiful window, absolutely stunning. Really is. Gorgeous little church. Really is. Now then, going back centuries, they used to hold marketplaces in here. So the market was held here with butchers and farmers and all selling their wares. However, they weren't particularly respectful of the place, and damage started to be caused. So such things as the font here, where the butchers and the farmers used to sharpen their blades, causing damage. I'm sure if you can pick it up on there, there's a few knife marks, etc. So clearly, as damage was being caused, they decided to stop the market being held in the church, and it all kicked off again. It all kicked off again, and they tried to keep the tradesmen out of the church, but they weren't having that at all. And it ended up that your church had to have bouncers, door staff, to keep people out of the church and to stop the market from trading. So yeah, Llangernyw, St. Tigainn's. Amazing. Beautiful place. Many legs make light work. This is my last stop on my little tour of the Llans here locally, and I'm stood at the entranceway to the lodge of a place known as Hafod Unos Hall. Now you can't see the building from here, and it's got keep out and private property, so obviously I have to respect that, but I'll put some stock photos up so you can get an image of what it's like. Now Hafod Unos Hall is dilapidated now. I think they're doing some work to renovate it, but at one time it was a very stately place. School at one time. It's got quite a lot of history, and I'll try and put a link to some YouTube videos that just mention it, and I'll put some images up. But Hafod Unos, we've mentioned Hafod before. It means a summer dwelling. and Innos means one night. So it's a summer dwelling for one night. Now, with it being such a stately home, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense because it was never a hotel or anything as far as I'm aware. But the name comes from the building which predates the hall itself, and that was an abbey. So there was an abbey on the original site. Now, Llangernyw, and this path, is in the old pilgrims' path. So pilgrims used to walk here, druids and the like. And the abbey used to offer them shelter for one night whilst they were on their journey. So that's where the name comes from. So the pilgrims on their path would stop here for one night before continuing on their journeys. So there we are. So I hope this has been of some use to you and clarified a little bit about the names of Llan. They're everywhere. So if you want to know the names of saints in Wales, then look at the church names, Llan something. Inevitably they'll mention saint names or a location. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Wylio. Thank you very much for watching. Join me next time. Be grateful if you press the like button, subscribe if you like, and hit that follow button. Diolch yn fawr, tan tro nesa. Hwyl fawr.